The spring air carried whispers of scandal through Quartz Hill, California, as Abigail Turner stood frozen in time, her white gloves trembling in her hands while her fiancé of 2 years, the so-called gentleman of the county, publicly denounced their engagement before the entire town at what was supposed to be their engagement celebration. "I cannot marry a woman whose family fortune has crumbled," Harrison Wells declared, his voice echoing across the town square where lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze of 1875. "The Turners are not what they once were, and I must consider my future." Tears threatened to spill from Abigail's eyes as she stared at the man she had pledged to spend her life with, the man who now looked at her with cold indifference. Her father, once the wealthiest rancher in the county, had lost nearly everything in a bad investment just weeks prior. The timing of Harrison's departure made his motivations transparent to everyone present. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Abigail stood alone, abandoned in her pale blue dress that had been specially made for the occasion. Her mother had fainted and was being attended to by the doctor at the edge of the gathering. Her younger sisters huddled together, their faces reflecting shock and embarrassment. "Is that all she was worth to you, Wells? The contents of her father's bank account?" The deep voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing Thomas Archer leaning against a hitching post, his Stetson tipped low over his eyes. He was not from Quartz Hill originally, having arrived 3 years prior to establish a modest but successful horse ranch outside town. He was known for his skill with wild horses, his quiet demeanor, and his tendency to keep to himself. Thomas straightened, his tall frame commanding attention as he strode toward the gathering. The spurs on his boots clinked with each deliberate step. His presence seemed to fill the square as he moved past Harrison without acknowledgement, stopping only when he reached Abigail. "Miss Turner," he said, removing his hat and revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. His eyes, clear and blue as a mountain lake, held her steadily. "I reckon I've been watching you from afar for longer than is proper. You've shown nothing but kindness to this town and to every soul in it, regardless of their station." Abigail stared at him, bewildered. Thomas Archer had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with her in all the time he'd been in Quartz Hill. They had nodded politely when passing on the street or during town gatherings, but nothing more. Thomas glanced around at the stunned onlookers before turning back to Abigail. "I see your worth, Miss Turner. It ain't tied to your daddy's money or your family name. It's in the way you taught the miners' children to read when the schoolteacher took ill last winter. It's in how you visit the widows on the outskirts of town, bringing food and company when others forget them." A hush fell over the crowd. Even Harrison seemed momentarily stunned into silence. Thomas lowered himself to one knee, still holding Abigail's gaze. "I don't have a fancy ring or a grand house to offer. What I do have is an honest heart, 2 strong hands, and the promise that I'll never measure your value in dollars." Gasps echoed through the square. Abigail's chest tightened as she stared down at this man, this virtual stranger, offering her dignity when it had just been so cruelly stripped away. "I know this ain't conventional," Thomas continued, his voice steady despite the spectacle he was creating. "But if you'd consider it, I'm asking for your hand in marriage, Miss Turner. Not today or tomorrow, but when you've had time to know my character and judge it fairly." Harrison scoffed loudly. "This is absurd. The cowboy thinks he can provide for a woman accustomed to silk and servants." Thomas rose slowly to his feet, still not acknowledging Harrison. "I'm offering partnership, not charity," he said to Abigail. "You don't need to answer now. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. Think on it. I'll call on you properly if you'll allow it." Abigail found her voice at last. "Mr. Archer, I hardly know what to say." "Say nothing yet," he replied softly. Just know that there are men in this world who see beyond bank ledgers. He placed his hat back on his head and gave her a slight bow. Good day, Miss Turner. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. Abigail watched his retreating back, her mind spinning with confusion, humiliation, and the faintest flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. Harrison's face had turned an unbecoming shade of red. You cannot possibly be considering this farce, he hissed, grabbing Abigail's arm. She pulled away from his grasp. You forfeited any right to an opinion on my future when you publicly discarded me, Mr. Wells. Her voice was quiet but carried across the now silent square. Straightening her shoulders, she turned to the gathered townspeople. I thank you all for coming today. Clearly, the celebration is over. With as much dignity as she could muster, Abigail walked to where her mother was now sitting up, supported by the doctor and her sisters. Together, the Turner women made their way to their waiting carriage, leaving Harrison Wells standing alone in the square. As the carriage pulled away, Abigail caught a glimpse of Thomas Archer mounting his horse at the edge of town. He didn't look back as he rode off toward the foothills where his ranch lay. What an extraordinary turn of events, her mother murmured, still fanning herself. That cowboy had the audacity. He had courage, Mother, Abigail interrupted softly. When everyone else stood silent in the face of my humiliation, he spoke up. Her youngest sister, Clara, aged 16, leaned forward eagerly. Are you going to marry him, Abby? Abigail gazed out the window at the passing landscape. I hardly know him. But you'll consider it, Clara pressed. For the first time since Harrison's cruel announcement, Abigail felt a small smile touch her lips. Perhaps I will. The Turner family home was not what it had once been. The grand white house still stood proudly on a hill overlooking what remained of their ranch, but the paint was beginning to peel in places, and several of their servants had been let go in recent weeks. As they arrived, Abigail helped her mother inside while her sisters followed solemnly. What will people say? Her mother lamented once they were in the parlor. First Harrison's disgraceful behavior and then that cowboy's impromptu proposal will be the talk of Quartz Hill for months. Let them talk, Abigail said, removing her gloves and bonnet. We have more important matters to worry about. Her father emerged from his study, his once proud frame now slightly stooped with the weight of financial worry. I heard the commotion from town, he said wearily. Harrison showed his true colors, I take it. Abigail nodded, unable to speak of it without risking tears. And this cowboy, Archer, is it? The horse breeder? Her father asked. Yes, father, Thomas Archer. Her father considered this, stroking his graying beard. Honest man from what I hear. Started with nothing and built a respectable operation. Not wealthy but self-made. Jacob, her mother exclaimed. You cannot possibly be encouraging this match. I'm encouraging nothing, he replied calmly. But our daughter has been publicly humiliated by a man we all trusted. If another man of good character has shown her respect, I won't disparage him simply because his hands are calloused from honest work, rather than soft from counting other people's money. Abigail felt a rush of gratitude toward her father. Despite their reduced circumstances, Jacob Turner remained a man of principle. I haven't accepted his proposal, father, she clarified. In fact, he specifically asked me not to answer yet. He said he would call on me properly. Her father nodded approvingly. Sensible approach. Whatever you decide, Abigail, know that your happiness is what matters to me, not the size of a man's bank account. That night, Abigail sat at her window, staring out at the star-filled sky. The events of the day played through her mind like scenes from a theatrical production. Harrison's cruel dismissal had hurt deeply, not just because of the public humiliation, but because she had genuinely believed he loved her. Now she questioned whether he ever had, or if she had simply been a profitable arrangement in his eyes all along. And then there was Thomas Archer. Quiet, reserved Thomas, who had apparently been watching her all this time. Not her family's money or social standing, but her actions, her character. It was both unsettling and strangely flattering. 3 days passed before Thomas Archer appeared at the Turner home, hat in hand, dressed in his Sunday best. Abigail received him in the parlor, her mother insisting on being present as chaperone despite Abigail's protestations that she was 22 years old and hardly in need of supervision. "Miss Turner," Thomas greeted her with a slight bow. "Mrs. Turner, I appreciate you receiving me." "Mr. Archer," Abigail replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I must admit, your actions at the town square were quite unexpected." A slight flush colored his tan cheeks. "I spoke hastily, perhaps, but not dishonestly. You claim to have been watching me," Abigail said directly. "I find that somewhat disconcerting." Thomas met her gaze unflinchingly. "Not in any improper way, madam. I merely observed what anyone could see in public settings. Your kindness to others, your patience with the difficult, your grace under pressure." He paused. "And I noticed how Wells treated you long before his public display, how he spoke over you in conversations, how his eyes wandered to other women when he thought you weren't looking." Abigail's breath caught. Had Harrison truly been so obvious in his disregard and she so blind to it? "You're very observant, Mr. Archer," she said quietly. "In my line of work, reading behavior is essential. Horses communicate through subtle signals. People aren't so different, Mrs." Turner cleared her throat pointedly. "Mr. Archer, while your intervention at the square may have been well-intentioned, surely you understand how inappropriate a proposal was under those circumstances." Thomas nodded. "Yes, madam. That's partly why I'm here today. To apologize for the public nature of my actions, if not the sentiment behind them." He turned back to Abigail. "Miss Turner, I'd like to court you properly if you're amenable. No hasty proposals or public spectacles. Just the chance to know each other as people should before considering a life together." The directness of his approach was refreshing after Harrison's flowery but ultimately empty words. "And if I decline?" Abigail asked. "Then I'll tip my hat, wish you well, and trouble you no further," he replied simply. Abigail studied him. Thomas Archer was not classically handsome like Harrison, but his features were strong and honest. His hands, resting on his knees, bore the marks of hard work. His clothes, while clean and well-kept, were plain and functional. "I accept your offer of courtship, Mr. Archer," she said finally, "though I make no promises beyond that." The smile that transformed his face made something flutter in Abigail's chest. "That's all I ask, Miss Turner. Thank you." As spring blossomed into summer, Thomas Archer became a regular visitor at the Turner home. He would arrive each Sunday after church to take Abigail for a proper chaperoned walk or carriage ride. Occasionally, he would join the family for dinner, where his quiet intelligence surprised Abigail's parents. "He's well read for a man of his background," her father commented one evening after Thomas had departed. "He told me he teaches himself by reading at night," Abigail explained. "He has quite a collection of books in his cabin." Harrison Wells had left town shortly after the broken engagement, reportedly to pursue business opportunities in San Francisco. His absence allowed the gossip to die down somewhat, though Abigail still noticed pitying glances when she visited town. What surprised her most during these months of courtship was discovering how much she enjoyed Thomas's company. He spoke little of himself unless directly asked, but when he did share stories of his past, they were fascinating. "I came west at 17, he told her during a walk along the creek that bordered her family's property. My father was a blacksmith in Pennsylvania, taught me the trade, but I always had a way with horses that he didn't understand. Why leave home so young? She asked. My mother died when I was 16. Father remarried quickly to a woman who made it clear I wasn't welcome. So I headed west, worked cattle drives, ranch hands, whatever paid enough to eat, saved every penny. Until you came to Quartz Hill. He nodded, bending to pick up a smooth stone from the creek bed. Passed through here on a cattle drive, saw this valley and something just spoke to me. Found out there was unclaimed land in the foothills. Not good for farming, too rocky but perfect for horses. He skipped the stone across the water. Took my savings, staked my claim, built my cabin with my own hands. And the horses, a genuine smile lit his face. Started with 2 half-wild mares I got cheap because no one could handle them. Gentled them, bred them to a stallion I earned breaking horses for the army. Now I have 27 horses, all with bloodlines I can be proud of. Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering principles. Unlike Harrison, who had always been concerned with appearances and social standing, Thomas valued substance over style. One afternoon in late July, Thomas arrived unexpectedly at the Turner home. "Miss Turner," he said when Abigail came to the door, "I wonder if you might accompany me on a short ride. There's something I'd like to show you." Her mother frowned at the impromptu nature of the request, but her father interceded. "Clara can accompany them as chaperone," he suggested, winking at his youngest daughter who had developed quite an admiration for Thomas. Soon, Abigail found herself in Thomas's wagon with Clara chattering excitedly beside her. They headed toward the foothills where Thomas's ranch lay, following a winding road that climbed gradually higher. "I've never seen your ranch," Abigail realized aloud. In all their months of courtship, Thomas had always come to her. "That's what I aim to remedy today," he replied, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. As they crested a small rise, the valley opened up before them. Nestled against the backdrop of the hills was a modest but well-maintained property. A sturdy log cabin stood at its center, with several corrals and a large barn extending behind it. Horses grazed in paddocks that stretched up into the foothills, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. "It's not grand," he acknowledged, "but it's mine, free and clear." He showed them around the property, his pride evident in every detail he pointed out. The barn he had expanded last winter. The spring-fed pond he had dammed to provide water year-round. The fruit trees he had planted that were finally bearing. Clara was immediately drawn to the horses, and Thomas indulgently introduced her to a gentle mare while Abigail explored the cabin. It was a simple structure, but surprisingly comfortable inside. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on horse breeding, medicine, and literature. The furniture was handcrafted but solid. "You built all of this?" she asked when he joined her inside. "Every bit," he confirmed. "Added the second room last year." He gestured to a door that presumably led to a bedroom. "I'm planning to expand again before winter. Another bedroom, maybe a proper kitchen." The implication hung unspoken between them. He was building with a future in mind, a future that potentially included her. "Thomas," she said, using his given name for the first time, "why did you really ask me here today?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because I wanted you to see me as I am. Not just the man who comes calling in his Sunday best, but the life I've built, the life I can offer." He took a deep breath. "It's not a mansion with servants. It's hard work and simple living, but it's honest and it's growing every year." Abigail looked around the cabin again, seeing it with new eyes. This was a home built with care and purpose, not for show but for living. How different from the grand but cold house Harrison had been building in town, a house designed to impress rather than comfort. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly. On the ride back to the Turner home, Abigail found herself contemplating what life might be like as Thomas Archer's wife. It would certainly be different from what she had envisioned with Harrison. Less luxury, more labor, but also, perhaps, more partnership and purpose. As summer turned to autumn, the Turner family's financial situation grew increasingly dire. Jacob Turner had been forced to sell off most of their remaining cattle and was considering selling the house itself. "We could move to San Francisco," her mother suggested one evening. "My sister would welcome us until we find our footing." Abigail thought of leaving Quartz Hill, leaving Thomas, and felt a sharp pang in her chest. Over the months of their courtship, her feelings for him had deepened into something she had never experienced with Harrison. With Harrison, she had felt flattered by his attention, pleased by his compliments, satisfied with the match on paper. With Thomas, she felt seen, valued, and increasingly loved. The decision came to a head in early October when her father received an offer for their property from a mining company looking to expand operations. The sum would clear their debts and leave enough to start fresh elsewhere. "We'll discuss it as a family," Jacob announced at dinner. "Each of you should consider what you want for your future." That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. She slipped from her bed and went to sit on the porch, wrapping herself in a shawl against the autumn chill. The moon illuminated the landscape, casting long shadows across what had once been prosperous ranchland. A movement at the edge of the property caught her eye. A rider on horseback approached slowly, and even in the moonlight, Abigail recognized Thomas's silhouette. Her heart quickened as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Abigail," he said quietly, spotting her on the porch, "I'm sorry for the late hour. I saw the light and thought your father might still be awake." "He retired early," she replied, not moving from her seat. "We had much to discuss as a family." Thomas climbed the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance. "I heard about the offer for your land. News travels fast." "Yes, father is considering it seriously." Thomas was silent for a moment. "Will you go with them if they decide to sell?" The directness of the question took her breath away. I don't know. I should, of course. They're my family." "You're a grown woman, Abigail. You could make another choice." The implication hung between them, heavy with possibility. "Are you asking me something specific, Thomas?" He moved closer, sitting beside her on the porch swing. "I think you know I am. I've respected the proper courtship period, but circumstances may force my hand sooner than I'd planned." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Abigail. I think I have since I first saw you teaching those miners' children, your patience never wavering even when they could barely hold a pencil." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest. "Thomas, let me finish, please," he said gently. "I'm asking you to be my wife. To build a life with me at the ranch. It won't be easy, especially at first, but I swear to you I will work every day to make sure you never regret your choice." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "My parents, I've already spoken with your father," Thomas admitted. "Last week, when I first heard rumors of the offer, I asked for his blessing should you accept me." "And what did he say?" "He said he trusts your judgment, that you've grown into a woman who knows her own mind and heart." Abigail wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "When Harrison left me, I thought my life was over, that I would be forever marked by that public rejection." She looked up at Thomas, seeing the tenderness in his eyes even in the moonlight. "But you saw something in me worth valuing when I couldn't see it in myself." "I only saw what was always there," he replied simply. Abigail reached for his hand. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." The warmth of his smile rivaled the rising sun. "I don't have a fancy ring. I don't need one," she interrupted. "I've had diamonds and found them cold comfort when it mattered." Thomas pulled her gently into his arms, his embrace strong and sure. "I promise you will never doubt your worth again, Abigail Turner." The wedding was planned for November, a simple ceremony in the town church before the Turner family departed for San Francisco. Despite the short notice, it seemed all of Quartz Hill turned out for the event. Perhaps they came out of curiosity, or maybe to witness the completion of a romantic tale that had begun so dramatically in the town square. Abigail's mother had reconciled herself to the match with surprising grace. "He may be a cowboy," she admitted to Abigail the night before the wedding, "but he loves you truly. That's worth more than any fortune." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Abigail wore a simple ivory dress rather than an elaborate wedding gown, and Thomas had a new suit made for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Abigail looked into the eyes of this man who had seen her worth when others had not, and felt a certainty she had never known with Harrison. After the ceremony, the town gathered for a celebration at the hotel dining room. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Abigail's sisters teased her about her new life as a rancher's wife, while her father beamed with pride. "I want you to have this," Jacob said quietly, pressing a small package into her hand during a quiet moment. "It's not much, but it's what I can offer now." Abigail unwrapped the package to find a deed inside. "Father, what is this?" "The northeast corner of our property. 50 acres that border Archer land. It's my wedding gift to you both. The mining company doesn't want that parcel anyway too far from their operations." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. "But your debts will be covered by the rest of the sale," he assured her. "This way you'll always have a piece of your heritage and Thomas can expand his grazing land." When she showed the deed to Thomas, his eyes widened in surprise. "Jacob, this is too generous." "Nonsense," her father replied gruffly. "It's an investment in my daughter's future. Besides, I expect you to put that land to good use. Maybe build a proper house on it someday when you're ready." Thomas shook his father-in-law's hand firmly. "You have my word." As the celebration continued into the evening, Abigail noticed a commotion at the entrance to the dining room. Whispers spread through the crowd and heads turned toward the door. Harrison Wells stood there, elegantly dressed as always, his expression a mixture of surprise and displeasure. Apparently, he had returned to Quartz Hill on business, unaware of the wedding taking place. The room fell silent as he approached Abigail and Thomas. Abigail felt her husband's hand tighten protectively around hers. "Mrs. Archer," Harrison said, emphasizing her new name with a slight curl of his lip. "What a surprising development." "Not to anyone who values substance over appearance," Thomas replied evenly. Harrison's gaze flickered between them. "I hear congratulations are in order, then." His tone suggested anything but sincere good wishes. "Thank you, Mr. Wells," Abigail replied coolly. "How fortuitous that you could return to town in time to witness my happiness." A muscle twitched in Harrison's jaw. "Indeed. I've just completed a rather profitable venture in San Francisco. I'm expanding my investments quite successfully." "How nice for you," Abigail said, her voice steady. "I'm sure you'll find that money keeps you warm at night." Harrison's face darkened. "I see marriage to a cowboy has coarsened your manners, Abigail." Thomas took a step forward. "That's enough, Wells. You're not welcome at our celebration. I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." For a tense moment, it seemed Harrison might argue, but a glance around the room at the supportive faces surrounding the newlyweds apparently convinced him of the futility of his position. With a stiff nod, he turned and left. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked Abigail quietly as the murmurs of conversation resumed around them. Abigail realized with some surprise that she was. Seeing Harrison again had evoked none of the pain she might have expected. Instead, she felt only a distant pity for a man who measured everything, including love, in dollars and cents. "I'm perfectly fine," she assured Thomas, squeezing his hand. "In fact, I've never been better." Later that night, as Thomas carried her across the threshold of his now their cabin, Abigail felt a momentary flutter of nervousness. The single oil lamp cast a warm glow over the familiar room, but everything felt different now. "Welcome home, Mrs. Archer," Thomas said softly, setting her gently on her feet. Abigail looked around the cabin with new eyes. Thomas had clearly prepared for her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed visible through the bedroom door, and a vase of late-season wildflowers graced the table. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," he said, watching her face carefully. "It's perfect," she replied honestly. "Because it's ours." The winter of 1875–1876 proved to be a challenging one for the newlyweds. Heavy snows isolated their ranch for weeks at a time, and caring for the horses required constant attention regardless of the weather. Abigail learned quickly that being a rancher's wife demanded far more physical labor than she had ever experienced in her previous life. But alongside the challenges came unexpected joys. The satisfaction of working side by side with Thomas to care for their growing herd. The quiet evenings reading aloud by the fire while snow piled against the windows. The deep contentment of falling asleep in her husband's strong arms each night, secure in his unwavering devotion. By spring, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas taught Abigail to ride properly, not side-saddle as she had been raised, but astride, which scandalized the townsfolk the first time they saw her galloping alongside her husband. "Let them talk," Thomas had laughed when she expressed concern. "They'd be more scandalized if they knew how capable you've become with that rifle." Indeed, necessity had required Abigail to develop skills she had never imagined possessing. She could now shoot well enough to hunt small game, mend harnesses with strong, even stitches, and help deliver foals during the busy spring breeding season. With the profits from that year's horse sales, Thomas began construction on a proper house on the 50 acres Jacob Turner had gifted them. It would be larger than the cabin, with room for a growing family, though neither of them spoke directly of that hope just yet. In late summer, a letter arrived from Abigail's family in San Francisco. Her father had found employment with a shipping company owned by an old friend. Her mother was flourishing in city society, and her sisters were attending a proper school. They were happy but missed her dearly. "We should visit them," Thomas suggested after reading the letter over her shoulder. "This fall, after the foaling season is complete. I can arrange for McCready to look after the ranch for a week or two." Abigail looked at him in surprise. "You would do that? Travel all that way just for a visit? They're your family," he said simply, "and family matters." It was in moments like these that Abigail was reminded of how truly fortunate she was. Harrison had always been reluctant to accommodate her family, seeing them as an obligation rather than an extension of his love for her. Thomas, in contrast, demonstrated daily that loving her meant embracing all that made her who she was, including her family ties. Their journey to San Francisco in October proved to be a turning point for Abigail. Seeing her family settled and happy in their new circumstances eased a lingering worry she had carried. More significantly, the trip provided an opportunity to see her life with Thomas through fresh eyes. "Your cowboy is quite the gentleman," her mother remarked one afternoon as they watched Thomas entertain Clara with stories of the ranch. "I must admit, I underestimated him." "He's a remarkable man," Abigail agreed. "I'm very fortunate." Her mother patted her hand. "No, my dear, you're blessed. There's a difference. Fortune is fleeting, as we well know. Blessings endure." Upon their return to Quartz Hill, Abigail and Thomas found their new house nearly complete. Local carpenters had finished the work during their absence, and while the interior still needed furnishings, the structure itself was sound and welcoming. "What do you think?" Thomas asked as they stood in the empty front room, sunlight streaming through the windows. Abigail turned slowly, taking in the craftsmanship of the high ceilings, the sturdy walls, the smooth wooden floors. "It's beautiful, Thomas, truly beautiful." "It's for our future," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "For the family we'll have someday." Abigail leaned back against his chest, a smile playing at her lips. "Perhaps sooner than you think." She felt his body go still. "Abigail, are you saying?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it when we stopped in town. We're expecting a child in late spring." The joy that illuminated Thomas's face was something Abigail knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He lifted her gently and spun her in a circle, his laughter echoing in the empty room. "A baby," he whispered reverently when he set her down again. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "You've given me everything, Abigail, everything that matters." The winter passed in a flurry of preparation. They moved into the new house just before Christmas, furnishing it gradually with pieces Thomas crafted himself and others purchased from the growing town of Quartz Hill. News of Abigail's pregnancy spread quickly, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and advice. Thomas was attentive to a fault during this time, constantly concerned for Abigail's comfort and health. He hired a local girl, Mary Sullivan, to help with household chores as Abigail's pregnancy progressed, insisting that his wife rest whenever possible. "I'm not an invalid, Thomas," Abigail protested when he insisted on carrying her across a muddy patch in the yard. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," he replied stubbornly. "Not my wife." As her due date approached, Abigail found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the public humiliation of Harrison's rejection to the profound joy of creating a life with Thomas, it seemed almost too much for 1 year to contain. "Do you ever think about that day in the town square?" she asked Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. "When you proposed so unexpectedly," Thomas smiled, his hand resting gently on her rounded belly. "Sometimes I still can't believe I was so bold. What made you do it?" "Truly," he was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd been watching you for so long, admiring you from afar. When I saw Wells hurt you like that, something just snapped. I couldn't bear to see your worth diminished in front of everyone." He met her eyes. "I spoke without planning, but I meant every word." Abigail covered his hand with hers, feeling the baby move beneath their joined fingers. "I thank God every day for your impulsive courage." Their son, Jacob Thomas Archer, was born on a clear May morning in 1877. After a difficult labor that left Thomas pacing anxiously outside their bedroom while the midwife and Dr. Morgan attended Abigail, the cry of their newborn son brought him rushing in. "You have a fine, healthy boy, Doctor," Morgan announced, placing the swaddled infant in Abigail's arms. Thomas stood transfixed at the bedside, his eyes wide with wonder as he gazed at his wife and son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny fist, just like his mother. Abigail looked up at her husband, exhausted but radiantly happy. "We did it, Thomas. We've created our family." "The first of many," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "if you're willing." In the years that followed, the Archer Ranch flourished alongside their growing family. Thomas's reputation for breeding excellent horses spread beyond Quartz Hill, bringing buyers from as far away as San Francisco and even the East Coast. The profits allowed them to expand their holdings, eventually encompassing over 500 acres of prime grazing land. Abigail proved to be not just a devoted wife and mother, but a shrewd business partner as well. She kept the ranch accounts with meticulous precision and suggested innovations that increased their profitability. When Jacob was 3, she established a small side business breeding and training carriage horses specifically for ladies to drive a niche market that proved surprisingly lucrative. Their daughter, Catherine Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Jacob, followed by another son, William, 3 years later. The Archer home rang with children's laughter and the steady rhythm of a life built on mutual respect and enduring love. In the spring of 1885, nearly 10 years after Thomas's impulsive proposal in the town square, Quartz Hill held a Founders' Day celebration to commemorate the town's 30th anniversary. The event brought together all the prominent families and businesses for a day of festivities in the same square where Abigail and Thomas's story had begun. As they stood together watching their children participate in the games and races, Abigail spotted a familiar figure across the square. Harrison Wells, now portly and balding despite being only in his 40s, was observing the celebrations with a pinched expression. Beside him stood a much younger woman dressed in expensive but ostentatious clothing, looking thoroughly bored. "Look who's returned to grace us with his presence," Thomas murmured, following her gaze. Abigail studied her former fiancé dispassionately. "He doesn't look happy, does he?" "No," Thomas agreed. "For all his money, I don't think he ever found what truly matters." Harrison eventually noticed them watching and, after a moment's hesitation, approached with his young wife in tow. "Abigail," he greeted her stiffly. "Thomas, allow me to introduce my wife, Lucinda Wells." The young woman offered a limp hand and a practiced smile. "Charmed, I'm sure, Mrs. Wells," Abigail replied warmly. "Welcome to Quartz Hill. Are you visiting long?" "Just passing through," Harrison answered before his wife could speak. "We're on our way to San Francisco. I've acquired several businesses there." "How interesting," Thomas said blandly. "We're quite content here, growing our ranch. Just added another 50 head of prime stock last month." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, I heard the Archer Ranch is doing quite well, surprising for such humble beginnings." Before Thomas could respond, their children came running up, faces flushed with excitement. "Papa! Mama! Jacob won the sack race," little Catherine announced, her dark braids bouncing as she jumped up and down. Jacob, now 8 and the spitting image of his father, grinned proudly. "And we'll ate 3 pieces of pie in the pie-eating contest." William, at 5 years old, nodded solemnly, his face still bearing traces of berry filling. Abigail laughed, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket to wipe Will's face. "Well done, both of you. These are our children, Mr. and Mrs. Wells." Jacob, Catherine, and William say hello to Mr. and Mrs. Wells. They're old acquaintances. The children offered polite greetings before Jacob tugged at his father's sleeve. "Papa, can we go see the horse races now? They're about to start." "Of course," Thomas replied, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "If you'll excuse us, we promised the children we'd watch the races together." Harrison nodded stiffly. "Of course. Good day to you both." As they walked away, Abigail heard Lucinda ask, "Who were they, Harrison?" They seem to know you quite well." Harrison's reply was too quiet to make out, but his dismissive tone was unmistakable. "Do you ever wonder," Abigail asked Thomas softly as they followed their excited children toward the racetrack, "what life would have been like if Harrison hadn't broken our engagement that day?" Thomas considered this, his arm secure around her waist. "I try not to think about it. The very idea of you married to that man." He shook his head. "But I suppose everything happens for a reason." "It does," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "His cruelty that day set me free to find true happiness." Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The love in his eyes was as clear and unwavering as it had been from the beginning. "Have you found it? True happiness?" Abigail looked at the life they had built together, their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the community that respected them not for their wealth but for their character. Most importantly, she looked at this man who had seen her worth when she needed it most, who had loved her through every challenge and triumph of the past decade. "Yes, Thomas," she said, her heart full to overflowing. "Every single day." That evening, as the sun set over Quartz Hill, and the Founders' Day celebrations concluded with a dance in the town square, Thomas led Abigail to the exact spot where he had proposed to her 10 years earlier. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Archer?" he asked formally, though his eyes twinkled with private amusement. "You may indeed, Mr. Archer," she replied, stepping into his arms as the music began. As they moved together beneath the stars, surrounded by their neighbors and friends, with their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Abigail's sister Clara, who had come from San Francisco for the celebration, Abigail reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of public humiliation to the heights of genuine happiness, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined on that fateful day when Harrison Wells had rejected her, and Thomas Archer had stepped forward to declare, "I see your worth. What are you thinking about?" Thomas murmured against her ear as they danced. "About worth," she replied. "Not the kind that's measured in dollars or social standing, but the kind that's measured in love and loyalty, in hard work and shared dreams." Thomas pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "And what conclusion have you reached?" Abigail smiled up at the man who had changed her life with his courage and conviction. "That true worth isn't something someone else can give you or take away. It's something you discover together, through all of life's seasons." "Wise words, my love," Thomas said, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "Here's to many more seasons of discovering our worth together." As they continued to dance beneath the canopy of stars, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that the life she had found with Thomas, this strong, honorable man, who had recognized her value when others had not, was worth more than all the wealth and status she had once thought essential to happiness. In his arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, Abigail Turner Archer had discovered what truly mattered. Not the opinions of society or the size of one's bank account, but the enduring bond of a love built on respect, partnership, and the unwavering belief in each other's inherent worth. And as the music played on and Thomas held her close, Abigail silently thanked the twist of fate that had led her not to the life she had once planned, but to the one she was destined to live, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined on that long-ago day in the town square of Quartz Hill, California.